Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on a guide to writing good specifications. Our presenter, Ian Moody, is sitting here next to me waiting to start. But before we begin, I'm just going to take you through a couple of housekeeping rules just to make the afternoon go smoother. The slides that you see and the recording of the entire webinar will be available on our SlideShare page and YouTube channel respectively. And we will email you links to these shortly after the webinar. It typically takes up to a week. A survey will pop up towards the end, and I ask that you just give some time to give us your feedback and tell us how we can improve and how you felt about the webinar. And lastly, as you're listening to Ian talking, you might have questions. If you look at the bottom right of your control panel, you'll see a little questions box, and this is where you can communicate with us. You can write your question as you think of it, or you can wait to the end and Ian will answer them when we finish. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll hand you over now.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Another one of our webinars. Okay, I won't bore you with what it says about me. Some of you may know me, some may not. You can obviously read that up in due course. However, one small point about the questions is if we do find ourselves running out of time, we are quite strictly controlled by time for these things because the system actually cuts off. So we do have to get done on time. So if we do find ourselves running out of time, that is absolutely no problem at all. We'll collect up the questions, or if you want to email them afterwards, you can always do that. And we will do our very best to answer them in due course and then post them up. So there is no problem with that. So please feel, don't feel that if you don't think of something now that you suddenly think of in a day or 2 days or something, that it's a problem. It isn't. It's not a problem at all. So you can always ask. The easiest place to start this conversation is by looking at the purchasing or procurement cycle. In effect, they're one of the same thing. I'm certainly not going to bore you by discussing the technical differences between purchasing and procurement. They certainly exist and they're not the same thing, but generically the words tend to get muddled together, like many things do. The procurement cycle starts at number one with identifying the need. Need identification is a process that we go through predominantly internally, working with our internal customers to try to work out exactly what they need. And our role is to ensure that what they need is appropriate for the business and that it is a need, not a want, not a desire. It's a real need. By that, I mean, does it add value to our business? As we work through that process, we need to ensure that we are setting clear and smart objectives. Smart, of course, is generally accepted to mean specific, measurable, agreeable or achievable, depending on who discusses it. I like agreeable for many reasons, realistic or relevant, and has a time-bound element to it. One of the key tools we use for that is actually the specification. The specification itself is the objective of the buy, is what we're trying to do. It lays down specific requirements that we can then measure against when sourcing and ultimately, of course, when buying and measuring performance. So the specification itself is a method of writing clear and precise and therefore smart objectives, and that's what it's used for. So the reason for showing you, it obviously begins right at the very beginning of the process, identifying the need. Now, I said that we write, we identify the need by working very closely with our internal customer. Often we have to work very closely with the external customer as well to understand exactly what they're expecting from our business entity. I'll move forward from that. So what is the role of the specification then? A specification is a statement of a series of attributes related to either a product or a service designed to define the detail requirement and then to communicate the requirement. It is therefore, like all objective tools, it is a planning tool. It is also a communication tool, and it allows that ability for us to evaluate. So when we start writing KPIs, the KPI should relate back to that specification. The KPI is in fact used as a measurement tool. Smart again, specific, measure. That's what the KPI does. Unfortunately, a lot of KPIs fail to do that. So evaluating the quality or the conformance of the goods or services supplied. In procurement terms, we talk about the 5 rights. Buying the right quality, the correct quality. Right in that main way means correct. The correct quality, the right quality. Ensuring that we have it in the right quantities. Ensuring that we have it at the right time. Ensuring it's supplied to the right place, and finally, of course, it's done at the right price. Price is always going to be left to the last, because if you don't have the right quality or the right quantities, the price becomes completely irrelevant. There is no value from it. So that's what the specification must include. There is a reality of life that says very often procurement and purchasing teams don't actually write the specification. They're given them by their internal customer. They're produced by somebody else who says this is the specification. Sometimes they're given the specification by the supplier. That's not unusual, especially with branded products or very complex services that you don't have the internal skills to design yourself. Don't forget then that these specifications are there to define the requirement, to lay down the need, and to communicate. They're about planning and communication. The world's father, or the father of contemporary management, a guy called Peter Drucker, unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he's certainly considered the father of contemporary management, is responsible for, let alone one thing, of writing a very famous book called Management by Objectives. And Peter Drucker made it very clear that there were only 2 functions of management. Management of businesses is about planning and communication. Everything else is a subsection of these. Everything is a subsection of planning and communication. So you can see, what have we got? Specification is suddenly becoming incredibly important. It is in reality king. That's what it is. It's right at the very top. If you don't have it, it's going to go wrong. As I just mentioned, of course, procurement people often don't write the specifications, but you are responsible as risk managers. You're there to ensure it's done correctly. You're there to ensure that things are not missed out, and of course they frequently are. So your role is to ensure that specifications are accurate, they are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they have a time element attached to them. We consider specifications under 2 predominant ways. One is known as a conformance specification. This can often be called prescriptive. Like when you go to the doctor produces a prescription that you take to the chemist, and it tells the chemist, the pharmacist, exactly which drugs to issue to you. It's conformance, and it has to meet. So in a conformance specification, it details exactly what is required. They are very simple in terms of checking, but they are actually very difficult to write. So many different ways of doing them. You might use a blueprint, you might use various ingredients, etc. Depends on what you're going to do. There is also a performance specification. A performance specification would be called non-prescriptive, therefore, and it simply gives a general overview of what is needed and leaves it to the supplier to use their expertise to come up with a detailed specification that you can then start to look for bids against. So that would immediately start to make you think that I need early supplier involvement during the specification stages. I need the supplier to be part of the team. You're not promising them business, you're not going to give them a contract necessarily, but you're asking suppliers to have major levels of input. And the more critical that supply is, the more crucial that supply is, the more important that's what you do. There has been a big change over the last few years. In fact, in my working life, I've been in business now for 35 years approximately, so I'm coming to the end of my career. And at the time when I started, everything was based on conformance specifications. But I've seen more and more moving towards performance, non-prescriptive. And that is because of the greater requirement for service elements. More and more people are recognizing how important service is in order to meet their objectives. They have to attain service, and in order to do that, it is extremely difficult to write a service conformance specification. So we'll ask the supplier to help us by doing it from an overview of the required performance. That will therefore lead us to understand as well that many specifications are being written as conformance, but should have been written as performance. Or we would discover later that, in fact, what it should be is a blend. Some of the specification is conformance in nature, some of it is performance, and by that we would tend to find that is now very much the norm. Much more often, I'm seeing specifications produced that are a blend between conformance and performance. So it is important we understand those basic principles of specification. Output or outcome-based specifications, well, what are they? They are another way of saying conformance. Easy to draft. Oh, sorry, I was saying performance. Please forgive me. Because it's just simply saying this is what I want, you tell me how to do it. Very easy to write, puts the onus on the supplier to come up with the details. They have another major advantage in that they encourage the suppliers to be innovative, to come up with new ideas. It also increases competition because you get many people coming up with many different ideas. It pushes the risk towards the supplier. And of course, it makes sure where there's expertise in the marketplace that you're using it. So this is something that we're beginning to realize, that we have a lot of advantages from using these outcome-based specifications, these performance specifications. I know of one major international company. Unfortunately, I can't tell you who they are for confidentiality reasons, but I know them extremely well. And their supply chain director is now adding into their prequals an element to look for supplier innovation, and he scores it as 20% of the overall output. So he's looking for suppliers who can innovate, who can think differently, who can help their company to keep moving forward and to develop their competitiveness in the marketplace. These conformance specifications, of course, push the risk back to you. If you get it wrong, it's your problem. Something to think about there. And I'm afraid to say they frequently are. when used, the purchasing organization needs to possess high levels of expertise. As a trainer working in the training industry, I quite often see conformance specifications from companies that say we want this training course delivered over, say, 3 days, and they give you a list of outcomes they require. But because they're not experts, they don't know it can't be done over 3 days. It's physically impossible. So then they insist that it is gone ahead with, and then of course everybody gets unhappy. That is therefore leading to the must fit requirement. There's a very, very famous story. Nobody can tell you whether this is true or not, but the UK government, when they bought Polaris missiles, bought the Polaris missiles and had the warheads that go on the end manufactured somewhere else. Nobody checked whether the two would fit together. So it is quite possible that sitting around somewhere are some nuclear missiles that do not fit the ends of the warheads. If anybody ever tried to use them, they might well blow up the whole of the UK. Let's hope they never do. Safety critical items are often designed, though, in conformance specifications. The reason for that is when they're safety critical, it's not normally your requirement you're following, it is a laid down standard that is in existence that somebody else has laid down. So, for example, if you want electrical equipment, business institutes like the Institute of Electrical Engineers will have laid down the safety standards, and there will be national standards like the BS standards and the DIN standards and the ISN standards that tell you exactly how that's going to conform to the requirement of the safety. So for safety critical items, they normally are written like that on purpose. Otherwise, of course, you could have some major accidents. So drafting specifications, drawing them up. We look at the performance objectives in functionality terms. We look at them in terms of outputs. We look at them in terms of the outcomes, what you expect at the end of it. You lay down the process needs so everybody understand what the real need is. That's very important, of course, when when designing any form of performance specification, and you look at the input parameters on what you expect to come back. You work out features, aesthetics. Aesthetics is a big element. People are more and more design conscious, more and more product conscious, more and more concerned about their environment. So people are looking for aesthetics. People want to see good products. They want to see well-designed buildings and nice offices and well-designed cars and furniture and everything else. So aesthetics becomes a very big issue, but you have to pay for it. Compatibility with what you have. Reliability, durability, maintainability, the ease of use of whatever you buy. And can you actually use it? You buy something and nobody knows how to use it. That's not unusual. I remember a very good story about this issue here. And I used to own a construction industry, a business in the construction industry, and we were also architects and designers. And we received a specification from the government that included the specification for the glass to be used in the building. We looked at the specification and we went back to them and told them, you do understand that if you use this glass, you're not allowed to occupy the building. So we would build the building, it would be completed, you would spend many millions, in fact, many, many millions, and you would never be allowed to use the building. And the reason was, at that particular time, the UK buildings for governments in certain areas had to be fitted with bomb glass, and they had specified shop glass. There's a very big difference in price between bomb glass and shop glass. They didn't want to listen. They said, this is a tender. We're not allowed to talk about it. So I made a very big fuss about it, and I went much higher than them, and I was thanked greatly for pointing these facts out to them. everything was changed and we won the project. Price, what is the actual purchase price? But much more than that, what are the lifetime costs applied to this? People specify products without actually thinking about lifetime. A very simple example, you might specify a Dell laptop because it's cheaper than an Apple laptop. And yeah, it is. There's no doubt about that. But an Apple product will last 3 to 4 times as long. Apple offer great service. If you have a problem with an Apple product, you speak to somebody, you go to the Apple store. Try speaking to Microsoft and see what happens. Lifetime costings. Quantities, time, place. This is the 5 rights. Very simple, as explained before. They need to be built into the specifications. If they're not being considered, it will go wrong. And the problem is, very few internal customers writing these specifications understand this. They will not include it. There will be something missing, and that will give the procurement department a big headache, because when it goes wrong, it will become the procurement department's fault. It's never going to be them. Right. So why should we use these things? It should be reasonably obvious. It's a discipline. It's a planning tool. It sets objectives. It lays down what needs to be itemized, especially when you're going to buy from more than one source. It produces conformance that is essential for uniformity. Uniformity means standardization. Standardization saves businesses a great deal of money. It is never a good idea to mix up too many different products or brands. Specifications provide useful criteria for measuring quality. As I said, I'm back into my objectives again. Quality measurement, smart, specific, measurable. There's the word. Specification, specific, measurement. Specifications provide evidence in the event of any form of dispute with the supplier. If it's not been met, it's not been conformed to, then here is the evidence that says this is what you agreed to do against our specification, or this is the specification you worked on our behalf because it was a performance specification and you haven't met the requirement. It gives you a way of control. It's extremely important. There are, of course, always going to be some disadvantages. Detailed specification is very expensive and highly time consuming. So we need to find ways of minimizing time. This is often done through standardization. The cost of inspection and quality control is often far more complex when you have very complicated specifications. The simpler the specification, the easier is to control it. Sometimes in many organizations, specifications become so firmly embedded, people stop being innovative. And they find themselves far, far behind the advances and changes in the market. Inevitably, one of the biggest areas here is in technology. Technology moves very fast. I remember doing a major project for the Bank of New York, which now, of course, is merged with Mellon Bank, so it's now Bank of New York Mellon. We were doing 5 buildings for them in London. We received a specification from the IT department as part of what they required for us to incorporate, and that included the building in of Ethernet cable throughout the building. They insisted they needed it. £500,000 of Ethernet cable went into the building because they wouldn't listen to my team. We tried to point out to them that the technology was moving at such a pace that they would be moving to wireless technology and they would never use that Ethernet cable. They insisted they must have it, and the only real justification is that's because the way we do it here. I can tell you for certain it's never once been used. By the time they moved into the building, they were gone or had moved over to wireless technology. They didn't need the Ethernet cable. They had no use for the Ethernet cable. But £500,000 of waste because of them not understanding and not looking forward. They'd got it stuck in their head. This is the specification. This is what we must do. And they wouldn't listen. Specifications create the temptation to over-specify. When you over-specify, you add cost. Lots of cost. But it also has the problem of increasing stock variations and proliferation. Stock, or inventory if you prefer the word, costs businesses an additional 30% on the buy price on average. It is not unusual for specifications to be responsible because they're interpreting the need. So as they interpret the need, they increase the stock. So how to write good specifications? Avoid these situations. How to write good specifications? Involve expert suppliers as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. How do you produce good specifications? By working very closely with your internal customers, by being involved with the sales and marketing departments, by working with external customers when applicable, by becoming risk managers, by embedding these ideas. Some of these types of conformance specifications, just as a brief overview, might be done technically with design. They might be done by chemical or physical properties. They might be specified by brand. They might be done by sample. They might be specified by market grade, or they might be specified by standards, by which, of course, we mean national standards. We're not talking about ISO. That's not what ISO is for. We're talking about BS, DIM, ISIN, etc. But in there's a big problem, because is the standard that you've applied to the specification applicable in the country that you're buying, selling to, or buying from? I know of one company here in the Gulf who had a specification for their product that was designed to meet a Swiss standard. I don't remember exactly why, but a Swiss standard. They thought that would be great. They picked up an order from a big company in Belgium. When they went to ship it, they couldn't get it approved to be imported into Belgium because the standard was different, because the specification had been written incorrectly. They ended up with quite a few $1,000 sitting on a ship that could never actually be unloaded until they resolved the problem. They had to take it back. Of course, they lost the business. It's a problem with standards. You need to understand standards. You need to understand what the legalities of standards are. Technical design Technical design specifications, the scope of the specification, its subjectives and its content. The definitions need to be clearly written. An explanation of the technical requirement needs to be given, so everybody understands it, so they can make comment. They can come back and say, this may or may not be good. That is frequently missing. The purpose of the equipment or the material, how it's going to be used, reference to any related documents, again, such as standards or legal documents which apply, the material requirement, the properties, the tolerances, plus or minus 2%, whatever it may be, variability, how much is going to be allowed, desired appearance, textures, finishes, etc. Don't write white. There's over 500 different colors of white. 500. And by the way, it's worse than that, because it also goes from 1 to 500 and then from A, B, C, D all the way to Z. The most brilliant white you can buy, 100% white, is 500N. So don't write white. Walk down the street, see two people walking on the street wearing a white dasher, and tell me they're not different, because they will be. Pick up a piece of white paper and have a look at it and put it against another piece of white paper, and they will be different colors. Drive one white car and look at another white car. They'll be different colors. They're not the same. Don't write white. Okay. Sorry, excuse me, needed some water. Maintenance and reliability requirements might need to be included. Conditions of materials, how they're going to be installed, how they're going to be used, what manufacturing levels are, storage issues. These are really big points. I've seen specifications written for products going into buildings that physically cannot be put into the building because they're too big. So people have had to take the roof off the building. The cost of the product they buy is $5,000, $10,000, and it costs them $50,000 to put them in the building. I've seen them written in such a way that they're so heavy the floor collapses. And I'm serious, guys. I am not telling you stories. These are true. Packaging is issues. Protection is issues. Packaging varies depending where the product's coming from. It needs to be in the specification. Packaging will vary if you're going to ship by freight, or you're going to ship by air, you want to ship by sea. The requirement for the packaging varies. Otherwise, you will get damaged goods. It's okay saying, okay, supplier's fault. I will go back to the supplier. The problem is you may or may not be allowed to do that contractually, but you haven't got your products and you've waited for 8 weeks for it and now you have nothing. Information should be provided to the suppliers for users quite evidently. That's obviously important as well. Performance specifications, those are obviously, as I said, called output, outcome, functional, lots of different issues here. What is the function? What are the performance? What are the capabilities? What are the key process inputs? How do they work? What is the operating environment under which it's going to work, etc. So there's so many different factors. And these lists I've produced for this are just overviews. Every time we do this, we need to sit and think about where can this go wrong? What are the possibilities for error? What are the possibilities for mistake? So these are just general overviews. These are some of the most common things that happen, but by no means any or all of them. Health and safety levels, especially in performance specifications. The problem about performance specifications related to services are very different than products. And one of the reasons they're very different, they may well be performed on your premises. Products are not manufactured on your premises, but services may well be performed on your premises. There can be safety issues. Safety, health and safety is a growing problem. As you realize, I come from the UK, even though I spend most of my life here in the Gulf, but I am still a UK resident. In the UK, we are terrified of health and safety. We have the most health and safety conscious business environment in the world. Yes, it's not the US, it is the UK. And that's because of our laws. Health and safety laws are very, very onerous. In 1974, the Health and Safety at Work Act was issued, and when they issued it, they said that for the first time ever, you are not innocent, you have to prove you did nothing wrong. So they reversed the standard of UK law, world law actually. So we get very worried about health and safety because it could get you into a lot of problems. Also, the fines are unlimited. People can go to prison. Health and safety issues, BP, Bay of Mexico, Deepwater Horizon, $100 billion in total. 14 people died. It was a specification problem as much as anything else, for many reasons, but it was certainly one of them. Different criteria laid down, etc. Moving forward. Sorry, excuse me. Computer's got jammed. Is it? Or am I imagining it? No. Okay. What happened there? Okay, it's my fingers not working properly. Thanks. Specification, specifying services. Because of the nature of services, there's a whole process mapping that we use. So the first thing is to design the service, then develop the infrastructure around it, then go through marketing the service to ensure we've got it right, and then to deliver the service, then to get the service outcomes, then to terminate the service when it's complete, then to take on board the consumer needs and the expectations and how the consumer chooses what they want to have, to build in sets of continuous improvement, to develop customer satisfaction and communication processes. Okay, sounds like a marketing tool. Well, it is and it isn't. Because when looking at service specification, we need to understand the whole process. Organizations that are predominantly service organizations have much more levels of complexity in that people expect 100% excellence because services are very close to people. They see them immediately and they tend to be able to reject service providers in a way they would not normally reject product survivors. So we need to be aware of the process that needs to be carried out. Now, that is now just coming up to time, but we have come to an end of the webinar. So may I ask if there's any questions anybody can think of at this moment in time? We're just going through. Okay. I have a question here. Is there a reference for specifications for each type of industry? Absolutely. 100% there is. You're going to need to be very specific. I can't answer different specification requirements by industry, but most industry bodies have their own professional associations. Certainly my industry background was originally, or for many years anyway, was based around the construction industry. So the construction industry has a series of specification guidelines issued. So you're possibly not working in construction, but if you were, I'd recommend you talk to associations such as the IBA, and they will give you specification guidelines. But every single industry has them. You would have to look around and make sure that's being done. I hope that answers your question, Mohammed. Salman is just saying thanks. Well, thank you, Salman, for being here. Anybody else got any thoughts at the moment? Right. Well, as I said, if you go away from this, this is really just, of course, an overview of all of this. You do need to spend quite some considerable time. I'm not going to try and sell you a training course on specifications, but I'm going to suggest it's something you really do need to be looking at. I've just had another one saying thank you very much. Well, again, Paul, thank you very much for coming. I hope you found that useful. Lots of thank yous coming through. Lars, thank you. Thank you, Lars. What would you recommend for performance specification in the event management? Wow. It depends on what you mean by event management, to be honest. What kind of event are we talking about? I mean, for example, are we talking about events related to, say, I don't know, doing a wedding, putting on a conference? It could be almost anything, an exhibition, and they're all going to be different. It is a really open-ended question, that. Trade exhibitions. Well, who's responsible for what? Mohammed, it's difficult to answer that. You're saying, what in the case of trade exhibitions? I think you're going to have to come back with something a bit more specific. When you do a trade exhibition, are you talking about the building of exhibition stands, for example? That's going to be a possibility. Are you talking about public facilities? Another possibility. There can be many, many aspects. I'm afraid you have to be a great deal more specific. We need to buy stands for exhibitors. Okay, thanks, Mohammed. You need to buy stands for exhibitors. I'm going to have to be, I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm avoiding this, and I certainly don't mean to. Every exhibitor has a different need. And every exhibitor will need a different kind of stand. And every exhibitor requires, as I say, it's a different need. So if you're talking about a standard stand that you can then simply say, here is a box and it's got lighting on it, and it's got walls on it, and it's no more than that, it's a simple formula, if you like, a stand in a carton type scenario. My recommendation there is, first of all, to go and talk to the experts that do these things, and there are many of them in the market. If you'd like me to give you some additional guidance, I actually am in a position to do that, but you're going to have to make a separate note on that, and you're going to have to give me a few days to talk to somebody who I know in that business who could certainly give you some guidance on specifications. I also believe, and I'm not sure about this, but I believe there is an institutional body for stand production for trade exhibitions that lay down a series of guidelines related to things like health and safety, electrical safety, slippage safeties, fire retardancy safeties, etc. The problem will come is the requirements country by country, nation by nation will be different. So that, for example, you will set down a minimum standard level, but you may find that what you're doing in one country is perfectly acceptable when it's not in another, or you may find you're over specifying for another country, and because of that nation doesn't need that, you're overpricing it. So there's many factors to take into consideration. But if you want to come back to me on this, Sherry, I'm sure will pass on it to me, and I will have a word with somebody who well, actually he owns a company, and I can ask him for some detailed guidance if you'd like me to do that, if that helps. Okay, hopefully. Okay, another Mohammed saying thanks for valuable information. And okay, and yeah, well, yes, Mohammed, I'm glad you appreciate the advice. It's honestly the best I can give you within a very short period. Anybody else? Okay, based on that, I'm afraid we're now out of time, so the system is going to shut off any second now. Please feel free to come back to us in the future.